Just off camera a little bit. Yeah.
Just a little.
Is that better?
Yeah. Mr. Srinivas is a veteran. I think it's.
He's a veteran. He's a veteran. He knows the job. Hey, Bhuvan. Bhuvan. Now Gursaran Dhanjal has also joined.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. How are you?
All is well, sir, so far.
All good. That's such a
Bhuvan.
What is the format? You'll raise questions to each of us, or you want us to speak, or what is the format?
What we're gonna do is we'll invite Dr. Ramachandran to start with. He'll set the context, and then one by one, the reflections, 3 to 4 minutes, which is what everyone can bring in. And then we get into a discussion, a Q&A. I mean, I can ask questions. Dr. Ramachandran can also pose a few questions. I mean, right now, I'm sure all guns will be pointing at Dr. Ramachandran. He'll have to answer a whole lot of questions.
No, I think Gursaran, probably what Srinivas wanted to also know is whether there'll be questions from those who are attending.
Yeah, so there will be a discussion, and there would be questions as well. Yes.
Okay, you saw what Nivedita is saying, Gursaran?
My video was not working, sir.
The format.
You can log out and log in again.
note that you have not disowned your community. You've made very constructive suggestions. And fortunately, you had a good career. So, you have no bitterness. So what happens at times is that bureaucrats who don't, rise adequately in their own eyes may get a sense of bitterness, which kind of comes out post-retirement. So, there is no such malice or there's no such twinge that one finds in this book. It's a very useful book. We've always advocated participatory democracy. We've always said that people are the most important component of policy making. So I'm looking forward to a very vibrant discussion on the book and listening to everyone's thoughts. Gurshran.
Well, thank you, Samirji. You've very succinctly summarized the contribution, the positive contribution made by the book. And you have also spent reading through the pages, and so have I. And the experience has been that whatever comes out is, as the title correctly suggests, it's practitioners' prescriptions. So exactly, how to bring governments and people closer, development practitioners' prescriptions. Dr. Ramachandran, as a distinguished fellow, Scotch Development Foundation and former Secretary Government of India, has put together an excellent work. He is a versatile and prolific writer who has penned down 9 books on diverse areas of urban development, ranging from public works to urban renewal to urban transport. And his last one was very different, was Mavericks of Missouri. He's known to have spearheaded the implementation of the GNNRM while being at the Ministry of Urban Development, prior to which he was Chief Secretary, Uttarakhand. We are pleased to have our esteemed panelists. Let me have the pleasure of introducing Mr. V. Srinivas, Special Secretary, Department of Administrative Reforms and Public Grievances, Government of India. Dr. Dipali Panjoshi, Distinguished Fellow, Scotch Development Foundation and former Executive Director, RBI. Mr. S.N. Tripathi, Director General, Indian Institute of Public Administration. Mr. Tarun Vijay, former Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha. And Ms. Nivedita Raju, Executive Director, National E-Governance Services Limited, and recently former Principal Accountant General, Karnataka. He's known to have. Before I move on to invite Dr. Ramachandran, let me add a few words about the book that brings out a number of common problems people face relating to the service delivery, delays, lack of accountability, transparency, apathy, or even corruption in both urban as well as rural areas. How to correct it is something which is what is more important, because these ills have been there in our society and in our system. Talking about public harassment by the system is one big factor that contributes to citizen dissatisfaction with governance. The book suggests a number of measures that could be undertaken to correct this malaise and bring about governance changes for effective delivery of services at the grassroots level to achieve the motto of minimum government, maximum governance, and better still, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. Dr. Ramachandran. Before I move on to invite Dr. Ramachandran, let me add a few words.
Thank you, Gurshran, for those words of introduction. Thank you, Samirji. And thank you, my esteemed friends, Sri Srinivas joining from Bhubaneswar, Sri Tarun Vijay, and Sri S.N. Tripathi joining from Delhi. Sri Dipali Joshi, I think, is from Allahabad, or
System is one big factor that.
Yeah, so that was mute, I couldn't make out. And Mrs. Nivedita Raju joining from Bengaluru, and greetings to all the participants. Some aspects of the book has already been mentioned, and one of the reasons why I thought we should focus on this subject is, of course, based on one's own experience. In service, we keep interacting with people. We keep doing various other things also. But one thing which always remained active in my mind was when government thinks about programs, government brings in various procedures, how does it actually reach the common man or the ordinary man? Though I start with the distinction, in the book somewhere I have also mentioned if you don't have the right contact, sometimes it is very difficult to get things done. So how do we move to a regime at a time when minimum government, maximum governance is being talked about, to a regime where an ordinary person, and I would always start with the one who is living in the far off villages or slum areas or some corners of cities, how does that person have access to what he or she is supposed to have in terms of services, documents, and things like that, and also in terms of the programs which are meant for him? We would have traveled a certain distance, but even today there are instances where it doesn't really work out the way it is supposed to be. I mentioned about a very small example of the Ayushman Bharat scheme, how a girl or a lady working as a housemaid finds it difficult to get her address registered so that she can have access to the Ayushman Bharat facility. So these are some of the select examples which are covered in the book. So this is what I saw and felt. And as I mentioned, there is digital there is a digital world today, but that has also to be meaningful to the ordinary person. I keep visualizing, some of you who are in service must be traveling and finding out. I keep visualizing a villager who is semi-literate or who is not literate sitting in some corner, and he or she wants to have access to some facility immediately. Can he or she do it immediately on their own initiative, or do they have to be dependent on somebody? If it is dependence on somebody, what about the internet availability? Suppose it's not available at a particular time, what does one do? One waits. So, and if there are complexities, how does one address that issue? And that equally well applies to people like us also. I referred to an example of the Life Insurance Corporation of India. Probably it may be changing, it might have changed. But what we experience in an LIC office or a bank office, there are more or less the similar, the same. And classic is LIC. Couple of years back, you go there to deposit a premium amount, but then the server goes down and one doesn't know when the server will be back. So the staff happily continues with whatever they are. In government offices, I think having tea is one of the preoccupations. So they keep having their tea. This I have seen in banks, LIC offices, and things like that. So there are issues like that which are there. Now, 2 points I'd like to clarify upfront. First is why this book? That is, this is to talk about people's problems and to focus on what further needs to be done. And it becomes important because we are entering the 75th year of our independence. So at least by the time, if we can ensure that what people need to get, ought to get, they can get it without any hassle. I keep using the word hassle quite often in this. And the other point is about the common dealings we have with various offices, how they need to improve, how their functioning need to improve. Some may be in the central government's jurisdiction, some may be in the state government's jurisdiction. And when I talk about governments, I mean, people could say government is only one entity, but I'm talking of different layers. In some matters, you have to deal with the central government directly. In some, it is the state governments, and in some, it is though there is no local government, the local bodies and bodies at the village level. So if these can change, that itself would make a big difference. As mentioned now, transparency is what is most important. Simplicity of procedures. How do we bring about that? Clarity required about guidelines. I mean, I always quite often I visualize myself as the one who is drawing up guidelines of a scheme or a program. When we do that, do we really appreciate what problems could come about at the ground level? Or if a circular is issued or a guideline is issued, do we see the practicality of it at the ground level and have a methodology whereby corrections can keep taking place? And here I go to my old example of, it's the same amount for building a school, whether it is plain area or hill area. This I have seen in the state of Uttarakhand. There is no change in that. To bring about change, it takes time because one has to go through the entire motion of coming back to government, and in government, it has to go up to a level where the decision has been taken. So there are issues like that. Should people be bothered about these nitty-gritties when they have a problem? So I've also made some reference to some possibilities of changes which can be thought of, something like security, society wardens to guide and help such people, and their role should be recognized, or eminent public persons oversight mechanism. I think this is also something which we require in our today's scheme of things. The time-taking process, how can we address that, and how do we have a constant system of reviewing it? To have an eminent list of true friends, guides of the government and people. These are some of the mechanisms which we could think of. Of course, if they are not performing well, they should move out of the system also. So, and we have something like Mr. Srinivas referred to the Good Governance Index. It has been broken down. I think it's for different. Can it be broken down for different cities, states, and different areas of activities rather than having one single index? Currently, I think it covers some 10 sectors or so. So, without prolonging it, as our colleagues have mentioned, it's worth going through the book and taking it forward. That's how I would see it. That there are many things which need to be done, and it can be done, and there is a possibility of doing it if you all work together. So accountability is important. Though we may say that accountability is laid down, but in effect, it's not so. If an ordinary person wants certain thing done, if he or she wants to know who is the one responsible for ensuring this, so there would be we would be referring to layers, this level, next level, next level, so and so is not available in the office and things like that. Decision-making levels should be clearly known to people. That also becomes important. Clarity about discretion. Now, whether to what extent discretion should be there. In certain cases, some discretion will be required, but how is that discretionary power exercised and how is it recorded? That becomes important. Transparency, repeatedly emphasized. Easy access to information. Things are changing, but still today also there are various areas where data information is not available for the ordinary person. Clarity about procedures. That is one thing very critical, I find. As I said, we lay down from wherever it is, the headquarters of the government or the state or whatever it is. But how is it that implemented and how to make that practical? For that, there should be a window available. Training given to staff. We understand that every level is trained, but simple questions like, is the staff trained as to how to behave with people? I may again refer to this example. I hope my colleagues won't mind it. You go to a bank, different types of bank branches. Some would be friendly. Some would say, I don't know, you go to the next counter. Similarly, I refer to the example of a post office. You stand in a line for quite some time. When you reach the counter, they say, this is not the counter. This is some other counter. You go and find out. Is that the way people are to be treated? That's a fundamental point I'm trying to emphasize. And that's where I think the training in that sense becomes very critical. Of course, we have traveled a long journey from the beginning of citizen charters, then we went to public service delivery. But still, the fact that there is much more to be done shows that we have to look at it in a very intensive manner and think about the changes required. Technology has to be meaningful. Technology, I hope, does not become a bottleneck for people, and grievance redressal also would be important. I'm deliberately not going to the aspect of corruption and where we stand as far as the corruption index is concerned and things like that. Ease of doing the business, probably we make some improvements, but all other indices about corruption, they talk about some of these basic areas which I have referred to, starting with registration, dealing with police and things like that. So it's all there. Now, one last question I would like to anticipate is, people may want to ask me what were you doing when you were in service. I think whoever has gone through my writing would have seen that efforts have been made, but there is a limit to individual efforts. There is a limit where the system has to work. And if the system comes together to work, I think that's what is going to make a big difference. Thank you, Bhushan.
Well, thank you so much. Very clearly, the standardization of procedures, standard operating procedures, and at the same time, the SLAs, everything is defined into the system. But yes, India is too large, and the experience is also vary accordingly. And with this, I invite Mr. V. Srinivas, Special Secretary, Department of Administrative Reforms, Government of India, and he's also holding additional charge of Director General, National Center for Good Governance, serves as India's representative at several international fora, and has held a number of senior positions in the Government of India and Government of Rajasthan, having served as the Chairman Board of Revenue for Rajasthan and DG National Archives of India. He's represented India at the International Monetary Fund at Washington, D.C. and the International Cotton Advisory Committee, amongst several other roles. Move on to Mr. Srinivas.
A very good evening to all the distinguished panelists. It's the first time that I'm speaking on the Scotch Foundation, and I've heard several good things about the foundation and the quantum of work that it has done in promoting good governance practices across the country. So thank you, Mr. Kocher, for inviting me today. Let me congratulate Dr. Ramchandran, and not only being a distinguished civil servant, a former union secretary, a former chief secretary of Uttarakhand, an innovator, an institution builder, who's painstakingly analyzed the critical policy issues for hassle-free governance and service delivery at the ground level. He is eminently qualified for undertaking this policy analysis. 38 years in the Indian administrative service, 10 years of post-retirement life. He still has extreme concern and empathy for governance delivery at the ground level. And as I read this book, I could make out that his enthusiasm for simplifying a citizen's journey through the labyrinthine governance process actually stood out. There are areas where issues like empathy, ethics, morality, which are foundational and non negotiable qualities of governments, have been discussed. The emphasis is, of course, on scaling up state capacity, digital inclusiveness, and also process reengineering. In fact, there are three separate elements to the book that I will discuss. The foreword from the Vice President of India pays a lot of tribute to Mr. Ramchandran's work. He says it's a long and rich experience and covers the quest for good governance that the nation is currently seeking in tune with 21st century aspirations. The Principal Secretary to Prime Minister also said that it is incumbent that we redouble our efforts to ensure that life becomes easier for those deprived and disadvantaged, to ensure that every citizen gets a smooth and in a hassle-free manner, whatever he is entitled to. I greatly enjoyed reading the first chapter of the book, Life After Retirement, Living with Dignity and Being in Service of the People. In fact, how does an IAS officer who's been in the topmost echelons of government spend life after retirement? And I found that what Mr. Ramchandran said, that if you've been a proactive officer and have taken pains to understand the various intricacies of the job, that is bound to generate interest in a cross-section of people associated with the sector. So he found himself being drawn into various committees and to chair committees, as also to write recommendations in his post-retirement years. He chaired the Indian Heritage Cities Network Foundation. He's had to deliver a number of talks, published articles, and as you rightly mentioned, in eloquence and erudition, writing 9 books, attending book discussions. And each of these requires tremendous commitment and discipline. It's not easy to write a book of this kind of depth of analysis without tremendous understanding of the subject. The next chapter, What Do People Expect, is really asking for deeper digital inclusiveness. And what we see in terms of India's governance models today are the rise of digital institutions. If you divide India's administrative history, you find that 50 to 90 period was largely one of regulatory governance, wherein which the welfare state models prevailed. Then came liberalization from 90 to 2000, and the bureaucracy had to unshackle the economy from the cobwebs. So a lot of new policies were created. Then the 2000 to 2014 years, which saw the rise of regulatory institutions. But from 2014 to 21, what we see are the rise of digital institutions. So Aadhaar-enabled DBT, PDS, NREGA, LPG connections, pensions, all these are good success stories. In fact, we've had even telemedicine success stories like eSanjeevani, Passport Seva Kendras, and even the universal accounts for pensioners like the Jeevan Praman Patra have been created. And many of these have been well accepted by rural societies, and transformation of India's rural societies, as Dr. Ramchandran said, through the CSCs, the Common Service Centers, the e-Mitras, banking correspondence, has been well documented. But there are also areas where deeper digital inclusiveness is necessary. The rise of the digital institutions has the potency to create the internet rich and the internet poor citizens. And it is important that digital inclusiveness in terms of setting benchmarks is vital. So the chapters with regard to the digital inclusiveness, be it in terms of urban reform, be it in terms of rural reform, or also in terms of grievance redressal, are all fall into one major aspect of the book. The second one is where he speaks of procedures and red tapeism. This deals with how central secretariats and state secretariats work. In fact, I found it quite fascinating that the emphasis on institutional memory for state secretariats as also central secretariats. And these institutions can be highly process driven institutions, wherein which often the process tends to outweigh the ultimate outcome. You can actually be bogged down in processes for a very long time. And an initiative for creating flatter organizations, reducing the channels of submission, organizing file melas, organizing Janata Adalats, Prashasan Gaon ki aur kind of visits where administration goes back to the village have been recommended. And each of these are very welcome initiatives. It's not that they haven't been practiced, but in the rise of a digital state, some of these practices need to be re-emphasized. And it's important that even if you have an e-office system, you still need to benchmark it to ensure that time-bound disposals exist. Dr. Ramchandran has also spoken about the Good Governance Index. In fact, when I authored the Good Governance Index 2019, Dr. Tripathi was a member of our subcommittee of secretaries as Secretary Parliamentary Affairs. And I do recall the number of times and number of meetings we had to identify an output-based indicators. And the Good Governance Index 2019 was an initiative which was based upon an output published government data-based index. We did not venture to get into the realm of collecting data from individuals. That is, input data from states were not called. Perhaps what Dr. Ramchandran now speaks is that the Good Governance Index should be expanded to cover cities as also rural areas. It's a welcome initiative, and perhaps we're looking at a Good Governance Index for districts, particularly in Jammu Kashmir, and that has come out quite well. But an input-based index where data inputs are collected from states could take some more time. There are two chapters, one on urban complexities and citizens, and the second one on how messy it is in the rural areas. And on urban areas, there are issues like benchmarks for water supply, benchmarks on electricity supply, service level benchmarks of international standards should be prescribed, and a utilities regulator to oversee these service benchmarks is necessary. And in the rural areas, the biggest issue is land remains the summum bonum of rural existence. And as Chairman Board of Revenue, I would notice the quantum of litigation across the rural countryside has actually exploded. We had something like 7.5 lakh court cases in the revenue courts of Rajasthan, and it would take enormously long time to ensure quality disposal. There have been very welcome initiatives for clean energy, which have found mention. The Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana has found high response across the villages, as also the Pradhan Mantri Gramin Digital Saksharta Abhiyan, which has benefited 6 crore Indians, is a very inclusive program. And I was happy to see several villages which had the cleanest village in Asia tag in Meghalaya, Mawlinong, and then Hiware Bazar in Maharashtra having 60 millionaires and barely any poor. I was quite struck by these. Then comes the chapter on the much needed governance changes. And this is an interesting chapter in which he has mentioned in his opening remarks also that arbitrariness in decision making must be checked with greater transparency and with easier access to information. I do like what he has said in terms of mobile protocols, and the quest for increasing efficiency in decision making is something that is a quest that government has been pursuing in recent years. The concluding chapter says, how does India's governance model become a global model, and what are the key steps? And the recommendation to have feedback mechanisms from ground level. Call all district electors to give feedback on a good governance practice in terms of one of their best disposal of grievances. These are very pertinent steps. And in fact, if you want me to sum up the book, I'd like to sum it up as the rise of digital institutions and digital platforms need to go deeper is something that is a message that is emanating from the book. The second one is that benchmarks are needed across sectors. We have digital institutions, but as we move forward, the next step is to ensure quality benchmarks are maintained. And the third is we need stronger public administration institutions. Dr. S.N. Tripathi chairs one of India's preeminent public administration institutions. And the recommendation is that it should grow into deeper and deeper institutions like the IIPA, the CGG, the National Center of Good Governance. The governance benchmarks need to go deeper. And of course, the last one is that the feedback on best practices must be taken. I think each of these is very pertinent, and I read it with great enthusiasm, and I found it quite unputdownable. And I would recommend this for every public policy maker with who wants a deeper understanding on the current policy mix. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is quite interesting. In fact, what you talked about, the good governance index to include the cities and the districts, and data input has to come from right from the grassroots level upwards. In fact, the Scotch State of Governance Index, which is what we've been doing for several years, ever since 2003, in fact, is pretty much based on that, on the assessment, based on the the good work which is done by the districts, the states, the central government. It's shared, and then it goes through the evaluation, it goes through cutting across, and then ultimately the states are, and all the stakeholders look forward to as to who is doing well and who's doing who's supposed to be doing well and not doing so well. So that's precisely what the point is, and the feedback mechanism is extremely important, as you rightly said. So we'll come back with more on this a little later. In the meanwhile, let me invite Dr. Dipali Panjoshi, who is also a distinguished fellow with Scotch Development Foundation and former executive director with RBI. More than 36 years of experience having worked with the RBI, and now an independent development economist. She's been closely associated with policy formulation in the area of rural credit. She was elevated as ED in 2013 and held charge of the rural credit, consumer protection, right to information, legal and currency portfolios. A versatile writer, has 6 books to her credit, on poverty and sustainable development, on financial inclusion, on microfinance, and on gender leadership. Mr. Srinivas did mention about banking as much as Dr. Ramachandran also talked about, the difference in services. I mean, if it is in Connaught Place, then perhaps the service level is different in comparison to if it is there somewhere in the outskirts of Delhi. Well, over to you. Dipali ji.
Thank you, Gursharan ji, and thank you, Scotch Group, for this timely discussion, and also for enabling me to share a forum with such distinguished luminaries, and very especially my friend Surendra Tripathi. Warm congratulations to Sri Ramachandran on this veritable tour de force. This is a book of great relevance and importance, as Samir Bhai pointed out, very especially as we move to 2022, the date set for achievement of targets under most programs, as has been pointed out in the book, and as Dr. Mishra, P.K. Mishra, points out, that we are now going to be celebrating 75 years of independence. So it is a good time for reflection, review, and for formulating a time-bound action plan for the way forward, as Dr. Mishra puts it. So we need really to learn from what's done and check out what remains to be done. The common man and his common everyday concerns commendably form the centerpiece of the book. He takes the PM's words, reform, perform, and transform, as his watchwords, and Mr. Ramachandran discusses the effectiveness of changes and programs which have been commendably initiated since the year 2014, when Mr. Modi came to power. Digital penetrative reach has indeed dramatically extended the frontiers of banking, and I saw this firsthand as regional director of the state of Rajasthan. The Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile trilogy enables benefits to percolate straight to the bank account. Thus, there are no leaky buckets or middlemen to siphon off the money of the poor in between before it reaches them. As the vice president, when he was releasing the book, said, there are no hands to shake and nothing in between those hands. So, delivery mechanisms in some have been made both more effective and more efficient. The banking correspondent, the bank in a box on a bicycle, the grassroots level barefoot banker who accepts money, issues a receipt, and also gives out cash. In this sea change transformation of a movement from brick and mortar to click and portal to banking correspondent, I feel happy that I played a part during my stint at the Reserve Bank. And Scotch, of course, has always hosted many seminars on financial inclusion and especially digital financial inclusion. Mr. Ramachandran moves on to highlight the problems the common man faces in dealing with government and government officials, highlighting problems of what he calls retail corruption, the role of the adjust, of the facilitator, the middleman, the jugaad, and what I call the leveraging of social capitalism in unintended and imaginative ways. A result of what he correctly points out is this is a result, as he points out, of information asymmetry, the need for transparency, which will lead to a return of trust in the system. He stresses the need for sensitization, for capacity building on a sustainable, scalable basis, starting with the malleable mavericks of Missouri, who still green behind the ears, keep trying to reinvent the wheel. So new government programs keep getting onto old ones without pausing to see what can be done, without pausing to see whether they are effective or not. What has happened? What were the earlier defects of the earlier programs, which continue in parallel? This resonates with personal experience as a member of the 12th Plan Group on rationalization of government programs. We came up with an impassable wall. No ministry worth its salt wanted its turf to get trimmed, no grants to be trimmed. These are subsidy linked programs. Subsidies consist of loans, there are loans from banks, subsidies come from government, but because the subsidies came late from the ministries, there was an apathy on the part of banks who were quick to sanction but slow to disburse those loans. Net effect zero. So transparent and time bound are good, impressive watchwords as justice delayed, so common in our courts of law is justice denied. Things can and do change, and he points to CP grams, grievance monitoring program, the officer of the RBI. I vouch for the fact that both these work, CP grams works, and there is an inherent accountability induced by the RTI, and this leads to a root cause analysis of grievances and to the initiative of sustainable, scalable, systemic change. This is very critical. Dr. Ramachandran rightly points to citizen charters, to time-bound delay of services. He has discussed the problems of the urban poor and the rural areas separately in chapters 4 and 5, not clubbing them together. The urban pool creating creaking infrastructure, the need for water, for a national water management policy, a national sanitation policy. And in urban areas, he correctly says that every sixth person is a slum dweller. So out of 64 million people live in slums, and 13.8 million households as per the 2011 census. This really reminded me, Dr. Ramachandran, of Catherine Boo's book, Behind the Beautiful Forever. As my airplane floats over India's commercial and financial capital, the bright blue plastic shanties at the base of skyscrapers are a grim reminder and a statement in themselves of the need for the PMAY and urban housing. If anything, COVID brought out clearly and starkly the long march, or rather the long, lonely march of the poor to the villages from the suddenly hostile spaces of the city. He, of course, suggests service level benchmarks, and the competitions which the Scotch Group hosts for the state governments, in which where the state governments are competing for those coveted awards, also I would like to feel and imagine makes quite a difference. So minimum government, maximum governance, a citizens services portal, a citizens response system, these are all citizen-centric initiatives because people must be at the center of an effective and just governance system. On rule based versus discretion based, discretionary for banks equals policy paralysis because they are then in the straitjacket of what are known as the three C's: CBI, CVC, courts. This fear psychosis also needs to be addressed as it trammels decision making. Nationalized banks, frontline staff, the eternal devotees of the tea ceremony, the Japanese tea ceremony. I absolutely agree with Mr. Ramachandran. They leave a lot to be desired, as do those in government offices. Gandhiji once famously said, the customer is our business, not an interruption in our business. Public servants need to be reminded that they are servants of the public, and capacity building and sensitization become very, very essential here. My own view is that this book, sir, must be made compulsory reading for all Masuri mavericks, all public servants, all government officials. And when I read your book, I was reminded of my favorite poet, T.S. Eliot, because between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act falls the shadow. The contrast between conception of an idea and acting upon it, the gap between the idea and the action, evaluation of outlay and outcome are so very essential. Because as the Latin proverb says, qui custodiat ipso custodes. After all, who is it that will guide and guard the guardians but the public? Releasing the book, the Honorable Vice President said books should generate ideas. And here this book has been eminently successful. Pratyaksham Kim Pramanam. I congratulate the author who has, from his distinguished service, distilled the wisdom of many years of public service in the 7 nuggets of the chapters of this small book, which has very huge and large meanings. And I again thank Gursharanji and Samir Bhaiji of Scotch Foundation for inviting me, and to this good audience for bearing with me and enduring me for so long. And I look forward to hearing what my dear friend Suren will say, and all others also. Thank you very much again. Pleasure as always.
Thank you, Dipaliji. And, as you have already passed on the baton to Mr. S.N. Tripathi, your fellow comrade, scientist, Director General, Indian Institute of Public Administration, who was earlier Secretary, Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, and Secretary IT, Panchayati Raj and Rural Development at Odisha. Several roles that he has been through, particularly
District Magistrate Sambalpur. His excellent work as District Magistrate Sambalpur in helping the weavers also led him to the MSMEs.
Excellent. So there you are. And, we talked about reorientation of our institutions, and IIPA is one where he has successfully implemented e-office and also, face-to-face training, which became practically impossible and nil. He worked to reorient Team IIPA towards digital and online training and education. So, with this, I invite Mr. S.N. Tripathi.
Good evening, sir. Let me, at outset, thank Mirji and his team, Gursaranji and his team, and all my friends and colleagues in congratulating Sri Dr. M. Ramachandranji for writing such an excellent book. Bringing government and people closer will be a subject and title of a book. Itself speaks a lot. What that means, a lot of distance need to be covered despite 72 years plus of independent. So I must compliment him for choosing the title itself. As far as the content is concerned, I have also prepared a long list, but my colleagues, my worthy colleagues, Mr. Srinivas and Dr. Pant, has made my job easier. So I can only say a few words, which will be the content for the next book of Mr. M. Ramachandran. We all listen to you, sir, wherever we speak. I have been chasing you for pretty long. At times, facility provided by Samir Bacharji, and many times in IIP itself. In rural-urban divide, we had a lecture with you where you and Mr. Vijayanand both spoke together. I'm really happy to be part of such a book and such a book discussion. And being a non-book writer and not even writer itself, it gives me an excellent opportunity to comment on a book which I have managed to read at least 30% so far. But I would like to read 100%, and by the time I read it, I will certainly be able to give better comments. But one thing I would like to say that the book is a timely reminder for each one of us to introspect on our existing governance practices and look for some promising pathways for reform in whichever situation, wherever we are. I compliment Dr. Ampinder sir once again for efforts in analyzing the current scenario and identifying the persistent gaps, and therefore the title, Bridging the Gap Between People and Government. Government is chosen by the people, and then I hope government here includes all the three wings of government: parliament, executive, judiciary, and bureaucracy, legislative, executive, and all the three wings. Because all the three appear to be moving inch wider from the people, and they need to relook on all these aspects of it. I hope that is the purpose of writing this book also. The objective of all governments in anywhere, governments are elected for the welfare of the people only. Otherwise, there is no reason for government to be elected. But government need to be brought closer to the people who has elected them. It itself is an oxymoron, unless if it persists because of the government structure or architecture or any rule or procedure which has come in between. I am one of those who believes that BMI for health is bad, but bureaucracy mass index is as bad, because that can be injurious to health also and health of a nation. Today we are come in an age of highly skilled civil services, because there is a lot of talk that bureaucrats in civil services, especially the higher echelons to which you and I belong, sir, it is being criticized that we are not that highly skilled. So therefore we need to hire talent from outside. And your book has given a lot of description on how the existing talent still can manage the great growth and great development, provided little things, small things are tweaked are changed here and there. Therefore, the system's capability are beyond doubt, but systems intent at times are suspect, and therefore need for capacity building, therefore need for writing such books. And I also compliment you that many retired bureaucrats become slightly cynical, slightly critical, slightly find nothing right, including sunset and sunrise. But you've thought everything is in place, except that a bit of capacity building, a bit of reorientation of the government that can do the job. And as I'm reminded of it that what Honorable Prime Minister recently said, what are the six quality, I think Mr. B. Srinivas very favorably points out, and I would have stolen this argument from his speech once he delivered in IAPA, that today Honorable Prime Minister said, what are the six things that I need in every bureaucrat? But the first it was in defined, sir. When I joined service in 85 and you joined much earlier, it was not defined. We were supposed to let loose, do all that you can. Keep Samvidhan and keep the process into mind, and you can break the rule as long as you can bend the rule as long as you are not breaking. But today government has put very clear image of a bureaucrat, what a bureaucrat should be. In fact, six qualities have been identified. And in fact, all the six are visible in your writing if you find it in chapter by chapter. One should be imaginative and innovative. One should be proactive and polite. One should be professional and progressive, energetic and enabling, transparent and tech-enabled, constructive and creative. In nutshell, he should be proactive and pro-poor, pro-people, and there is no need for bridging the gap. In fact, he should be the bridge itself. But that bridge is getting wider, a lot of water is going under the bridge, but both sides do not know what is happening where and what can be done. And so we have tried to bridge that gap while highlighting the difficulties encountered by common citizens in public offices and how that can be removed. Yes, digital governance is an answer. DVT has been implemented very, very successfully, but the last mile is the hardest mile. In fact, we should start with first mile in mind. Only then we will design an architecture which will serve the people. India is a subcontinental country, but we have a continental problem. We have Himalayan to guard us, but we have Himalayan problem. And Himalayan to ocean, H2O, is not only the subject of science, it is also subject of architecture and governance. So Himalayan to ocean problem need to be tackled. And such type of bureaucrat as has been envisaged by the Prime Minister. And many places in your writing that are visible. And not only this book, the other writings and your speeches, I have found that all these qualities are, they are present, one can see in you. which is reflected in your writings, which is reflected in your posts wherever you were. I have heard you while speaking as a chief secretary, Uttarakhand, in a function where something was being launched, and I have seen you speaking as urban secretary, and I have seen you speaking on all these issues that look mundane, but they are very, very fundamentally super common citizens. Many times we think that digital is the solution, but digital could be part of the problem also. Very rightly highlighted by B. Srinivasji that digital haves and have not could be another area of concern. The steps are not taken early. But yes, sir, I really would like to compliment you for highlighting CP Gram, which is with the concern of both of us, I think all three of us, which brings together, because if bureaucracy functions properly, there is no need for grievance. But if there is grievance, that means the pain points are being highlighted by the people. Like you give corona symbols, if you get it tested, you find positive. But if you don't treat yourself, you cannot become negative unless adequate things are provided. Today's CP Gram, which used to get 2-3 lakhs grievances each month, now is handling about, I am told, about 30 lakhs, if not more. That speaks that people's trust in the government and governance is increasing. Because only people complain when they know that it will be heard. You don't throw a stone on a tree which doesn't have fruits. So that is one new thing has happened, that because of handling of public grievances, more trust is building in the government, which is a very, very good thing, because a country of continental size that of India, a billion plus strategy requires billion plus complaint also, because there will be billion plus pain points and we can't avoid them. We are a developing country. A developing country always have all the problems. Because developed country have different sets of problems. But we will have all those problems, and all those pain points has to be identified. What we call it, LPG became a gas. Liberalization, privatization, and globalization, which was described as a gas. But today gas has become new meanings. People are gifted with attitudes. Attitude that can help people. So GA. And S means skill and competency that is required for becoming a good bureaucrat. LPG and gas are now working together. If you want to have liberalization, privatization, and globalization of economic and practice of production, you need a bureaucracy which has GAS, what we call it, gifted with talent, attitude of being pro-poor, and skill of having all the necessary competencies to handle digital, so that they can deliver physical, and wherever required, they can be digital, but they are still relevant to the people. There's no need for giving them training that you are supposed to be closer to the people. In fact, we are paid to solve the problems. We are the bridge through which the government benefits process. If we keep on smelling the benefit, the government need to avoid us an 85-15 debate that was very famous. If 15% to system mein 85% kahan chala jata, nobody knows. Now digitally, all those things have been sorted out, sir. And this is the age of new leadership in the bureaucracy. You have hinted at many places that leadership and management is all about accountability, or even responsibility to take it to the next level. Old leadership, when I joined maybe 30, 40 years back, we were heard as district magistrate, Jilla Sahab aaye jo bole ho sakte. As that sat is not true. That sat need to be delivered on the ground. Old leadership leading from the front, crack the whip, bar commands and bask in glory. Those days are over. The new leadership in bureaucracy also has taught lead from the center and lead to collaborate, communicate, take the brickbats and pass the bouquet is the order of the today's bureaucracy. I hope that need to be cultivated through training and capacity building. But that should start at the foundation level itself. Today, people are joining at an age which is not very tender. And therefore, when the age is not tender, the thoughts are equally harder. So convincing them that you are made for the people, by the people, and of the people, you are paid by the people, and they don't require a bridge. But you need to better deliver. And this need to be very clearly understood by the bureaucracy at all the levels. And therefore, the new management also need to be looked into different way. Leadership and management is not one and same thing, sir. You know it. Ford told workers to do what I say, how to do, and I will pay you higher wages. And it worked during those days. It may not work today. McDonald's did the same thing and it worked.
Mr. Tripathi, in fact, you have raised.
I have 1 minute. I will take only 60 seconds.
We have a lot more time. I'll come back to you. This is just the opening comment. The real discussion.
So to begin to close it, I would say that, sir, we have a Statue of Liberty, but we don't have a Statue of Responsibility. The time has come to think on those lines. I hope that will be thought for the day. And with this, I must thank the organizer for providing me a chance to listen and maybe share some of the maestro thoughts.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And as I said, we will have time for discussion, and I'll come back to you asking for more. Thank you so much.
Dr. Ramchandran for bringing out this book. I know when things were very difficult, more difficult, and I was almost nothing. We had a conference in Dehradun bringing technology closer to the people. That could be held because Dr. Ramchandran was there, and it was attended by people like FC Kohli from Tata Consultancy Services and Ashok Jhunjhunwala and many other important people, so that the children of tribal areas in the Himalayan region could get the technological benefit through a systematized institution. The title itself says that there is a need to bring the governance and people closer. Otherwise, could not have been like this. I have seen that when people who represent the masses in Parliament House, when they are elected, how they behave, and when they are unelected, the change in their behavior. The accessibility is the main key. Officers and the netas both should be accessible to the people, and the center of their all actions should be the people, as the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said. Since Prime Minister Narendra Modi has taken over, his primary focus is on how to bring the people closer to the governance and closer to the government people. This is what he did in Gujarat when he was a chief minister. Uh, it is the Gujarat model. It is still a matter of great study, that how the people could get what they wanted to get through their representatives and through the government system. He made the system. I know when Narendra Bhai was first time chief minister, he started a new thing. That was 3 days of Chintan Shivir in a good resort in Gujarat, where all the bureaucrats of the state would come on the stage. All the leaders and politicians, cabinet ministers, including the chief minister, would sit in the audience, and they would ask, "Give me your best story. Give me your best narrative of what you did in your area, in the region where that was assigned to you, and give me the problem. What were the hurdles that you faced?" The program began with some patriotic song. It was cultural thing, and the rest of the day was spent listening to those who were supposed to deliver the government programs and policies to the people. It was such a great interaction or the manthan between the politician and the bureaucrats, that it helped changed the attitude of many people. It helped change that thinking among the politicians, and it really worked. This is how today what happens, that there is a big difference of attitude among the bureaucrats and the netas, and most of the इसमें इसका चार्जर चाहिए मुझे, भुवन है तो बैटरी लॉ because bureaucrats are not so much connected. This is the general perception, which is now being waning because of Modi's new policies. I give you two examples before I conclude my views on this book. The first is Haryana's Rakhi Gadi. Rakhi Gadi is the world famous Harappan site. It's the largest Harappan site in the world. It's twice the size of Mohenjo-daro. When I joined, I visited about a year and a half to Rakhi Gadi, and I was a guest to find that almost more than 80% of Rakhi Gadi is destroyed. All the soil has gone to the brick kilns, the new constructions, the roads, houses, everything has been done. Although it was discovered way back in early 90s, and before that, the local universities, colleges, and many institutions worked on it. And all these years, whoever came, whatever they found, they kept there in their jhola and went away. There was no access control, there was no light, there was no shelter, there was no water, there was no description, there was no literature, and there was no awareness amongst the villagers that you are sitting where your forefathers, your ancestors worked and made this a grand city of the world, 7,000, 8,000 year old. There is a grand wall in Rakhi Gadi. In that wall itself, there are layers after layers which give you proved that artifacts and antiquities of 7,000, 8,000 year old. All those layers are there in that wall. What happened? Everyone knew about it. The Haryana government officers knew about it. But there was a fight tussle between the center bureaucrat and the state bureaucrat. And the state created a museum right on the site, violating all the laws of Amasra Act. And that was Greek in its front facade. You are building something so foreign in a site which depicts, which defines my roots as a Harappan, as a Sindhu Saraswati civilization person. So many things after I said that don't do this file here. Everyone is a phone call away. Start working and let the people in Haryana and center government work in unison. And fortunately, after 1.5 years of struggle and 6 meetings with the chief minister, we could find that high level committee, a joint committee is now formed, representing Haryana government, chief minister, the central government, the culture secretary, and things are moving in a better way to safeguard the most priceless, ageless archaeological site in the world. In the world, this is what happens when the distance between the bureaucracy, the politician, and the people is increased. The other example is of my early working days. I was working as a Hindu missionary in Silvassa, Dadra Nagar Haveli. It's a union territory. And there I found that the Kathodis are the worst of the last of the people in the last of the line. There are Warlis, Dhodias, Konkanas, and Kathodis. These are the tribal people. Warlis, you know, are famous for their Warli paintings also. So I wanted that Kathodi people must send their children to the school. There was a school in the vicinity. When I took the child to the school, the principal refused, saying that Sahib, these people are just don't have any sense of dressing, and they look very dirty. I am getting children from all the government officers. They will take out their children if I allow this boy in class first. So we have to sit on dharna. And then finally things moved. The attitude of the bureaucrat and the politician must change. That is something that Prime Minister Modi has done, which was unimaginable before. Unimaginable before. Sahab bathroom mein hai. This was the line for officers or for the netas. Whenever a person would call them, the receiver would say, "Abhi busy hai sahab bathroom mein." So ye jo this big change has brought a new era. And what has changed, especially the Ayushman Yojana and Har Ghar Nal. The water is very important, and making the water available to the distant area people is something revolutionized. Number one. Number two, Mudra Yojana. And number three, a road structure. I used to take 7 to 8 hours to reach Dehradun, hardly 300 kilometers. Now I reach Dehradun in 3.5 or 4 hours. That has changed the entire attitude and given a lot of confidence. The third thing is that agriculture and health sector. Health sector needs the biggest support. I agree with Dr. Ramchandran when he says that the 2.5% of the budget must be spent on health. But this book has a number of such paragraphs which I think all the bureaucrats, especially in Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy, those trainees, they must be made to read and repeat it. I emphasize it because that's important. The health infrastructure against I'm quoting from page 63 that the like Puducherry, which had taken away many strides ahead of the rest of the country. So out of the requirement of 24 medical officers as per the Indian public health standards, the territory has 56 registered allopathic doctors per 1 lakh population. There are 169 female health workers against the standard of 54. Fantastic. How could it happen? In Uttarakhand, we needed 86 doctors in a upper hill area, but there were only 24 available. Everyone wanted to come to Haldwani and Dehradun. This is the basic problem. I think we must focus on health and education sector immediately. These are as important as the defense of India. If you are not getting a proper educated children in the government schools, then you are not making, you are weakening the country. You are weakening the defense of the country. I again would like to quote uh, one of the line that the fact remains that if an ordinary person has to get anything done relating to the police, it is a constant struggle. It is a constantly, it's a pain on in the neck. People with folded hands say, भगवान न करे आपको पुलिस या कोर्ट में जाना पड़े. It's a curse. Why is it so? Because we are still working with a colonial mindset, the colonial system, the colonial prejudices, the colonial bent of mind is still at work. Uh,
Oh, in
DCP,
fact, Tarunji, you pointed out something very, very interesting. The book also says that is it fair to say that the government functionaries are all too tied up and under pressure as their hands are full and have more than a variety of responsibilities? That's the reason the harassment comes in. So, in fact, that's an
yes,
interesting aspect of bureaucracy. Which needs fixing, as you rightly said, that while there are a whole lot of good things happening, the book also points out certain anomalies within the system that need correction. And if you look at last 70 years of history, a whole lot of things probably which were ailing it earlier have now been improved, and digital in fact has come to a very, very predominant role. I'll definitely come back to you asking for more. In the meanwhile, let me invite our next panelist, Nivedita Rajuji, who is Executive Director at National E-Governance Services Limited and former Principal Accountant General, Karnataka. She has worked at various levels in the Indian Audits and Accounts Department, as well as deputation basis outside the department, including the present assignment at NESL. Earlier at the Ministry of Urban Development, she worked on national urban sanitation policy and service level benchmarks for water and sanitation, which is very interesting part. And book also talks pretty much about it. And she was also Assistant Director General at UIDI. And with this, I hand over to Nivedita ji. Please. Nivedita ji, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Dr. Ramachandran and other distinguished members of the panel, I would like to thank the Scotch Foundation for inviting me to participate in this session. The book that we are discussing today not only documents instances where service delivery by the government is a source of immense frustration, but also outlines many doable solutions. Dr. Ramachandran draws on his understanding of the system as an insider, that is, as an administrator who has worked in diverse sectors at various levels, and also as a citizen who has been at the receiving end of the system. This makes his suggestions all the more valuable and practical. As someone who has worked with him, I have watched his commitment to improving the functioning of government firsthand during various meetings that he presided over as Secretary Urban Development. The pains he took to understand the challenges that people faced in the field and to recognize and support those who were keen to deliver are still very fresh in my memory. I distinctly remember his deep commitment to institutional reform, which was a very important aspect of JNNURM. Aspects such as the community participation law and public disclosure law, property tax reform, establishment of ward committees, etc. The book has important suggestions, including the need to disseminate reliable and timely information, designing procedures in a manner that only what is absolutely essential is provided for, etc. These are generic and need to be customized to specific situations. The suggestion which appealed to me the most is the institution of an index which will measure the ease of the common man's interaction with government. It reminds me of the annual countrywide rating of cities for their performance on sanitation, which we started in the Ministry of Urban Development when Sir was the secretary. Today, as most of us are aware, the city of Indore, which has consistently scored the first rank, has become a role model for other cities. While designing such an index, it is very important to ensure that the index is conceived and implemented in a manner that it achieves what it intended to. Again, I would like to draw a parallel with an exercise which we took up in the Ministry of Urban Development, that is the formulation of service level benchmarks for the urban water and sanitation and transport sectors. While it is important to measure performance, it is even more important to ensure that the measurement is accurate and reliable. Accordingly, while formulating the benchmarks, we incorporated an information systems improvement plan with the intention of progressively moving towards greater precision in measurement. While reading this book, I remembered another book that I read recently, a book called The Gated Republic by the journalist Shankar Iyer. The tone of the book is very different from the book that we are discussing today, and the author writes in a very, very telling manner that what has been intriguing to learn is how taxpayers and other citizens have internalized the incapacity of the state to deliver public goods and services. Millions are opting out mentally from holding governments accountable and are turning to private sector providers. He refers to this as the normalization of failure. I think most of us have normalized failure today. I will speak today in my capacity as an officer of the Indian Audit and Accounts Department, which all of you would know is headed by the Controller and Auditor General of India. The public perception of audit is that it is a spoiler or a fault finder. Along with the CBI and CBC, it has been castigated as one of the institutions that has discouraged boldness and reform. Very few are aware that there is much more to audit than the big ticket reports that have hit the headlines in the recent past. We make an important and useful contribution to governance in the form of performance audits, which are independent, objective, and reliable examination of whether systems, operations, programs, activities, or organizations are operating in accordance with the principles of economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. The main objective of performance audit is to constructively promote economical, effective, and efficient governance. It also contributes to accountability and transparency. As Principal Accountant General in Karnataka, I had the opportunity to conduct several performance audits. In most of them, we involved subject experts, interviewed beneficiaries, and also conducted joint physical verification along with the officials of the department. Most importantly, we interacted with the executive at every stage in order to make sure that we were on the right path. In many of our audits, we analyze the reasons for underperformance and make recommendations. While conducting a performance audit on solid waste management in about 40 cities of Karnataka, we highlighted the fact that there was a severe resource deficit, both in qualitative and quantitative terms. While conducting a performance audit on ambulance services, we found issues such as non specification of service levels to be achieved by the private sector provider, lack of basic data regarding performance of the call center staff, non-maintenance of databases, and a large number of vacancies in the cadre of driver. In another performance audit on the implementation of the 74th Amendment in the state of Karnataka, we highlighted institutional issues, inadequate financial devolution, etc. As Principal Accountant General, one of my responsibilities was to regularly attend meetings of the Public Accounts Committee, which comprises legislators who discuss our audit reports with the executive. And there was never an occasion when the executive did not agree with our findings or our recommendations. On several instances, corrective action was taken on the basis of the findings in the report. It has been extremely heartening when the heads of some administrative departments have thanked me for the reports that we prepared. A couple of officers who were transferred to new posts asked for the details of audit observations pertaining to their department with a view to addressing important concerns on priority. I would like to inform everyone here that the Indian Audit and Accounts Department accords a very high priority to capacity building. We have been building up a lot of capacity in the area of auditing information systems and also in auditing from the perspective of the environment. There is a lot of effort and rigor that goes into our audits, but unfortunately, we do not get enough bang for the buck. Uh, we need more dissemination of our reports through institutions such as colleges, universities, the media, the fora like this, etc. And in fact, I was delighted to find a reference to an audit report in Sir's book where he talks about the Pradhan Mantri Bima Fasal Bima Yojana. So there is really a lot of effort that goes in, and I would really, request everybody to think beyond CAG just in the context of what CAG has meant in the last few years.
Well, thank you. You, in fact, have also touched upon the role of the CAG, via its performance audits. And you happen to be one who has an excellent track record of working proactively both in the audit system and outside of that, in areas of both urban development, Aadhaar system, and now in the national e-governance services. So, in fact, Dr. Ramachandran has highlighted how one such audit brought to light the lack of awareness amongst farmers, which is what you mentioned as Fasal Bima Yojana. And as someone who had taken the lead in getting performance audit done in key areas like municipal capacity, stormwater management, etc., in the state of Karnataka itself in recent years, how satisfied are you about these audits serving the purpose of improving delivery, A, and awakening the system to perform its duties? Nivedita ji.
When it comes to audits on the 74th Amendment or, stormwater drainage, of course, I was in a slightly different position because I have worked in these areas on the other side. And, that certainly improved. I was handling urban water supply and sanitation and local self-government in the Ministry of Urban Development when I worked with Sir. And of course, I think there is much more that people can get out of our reports than what they are getting. In all our discussions with the executive, there was nothing that was disputed. In fact, at times they would, there are people from the executive who would ring up officers from my side to, get their doubts clarified, etc. Because, there is a lot of subject study that we do. But then, yes, I definitely do think that our reports could be put to greater use than they are put now to now. One reason is that there is a lot of delay in the discussion of our reports. So by the time the Public Accounts Committee discusses our report, the report is generally is dated and therefore not very relevant. So I did try and request the Public Accounts Committee to discuss current reports. And of course, to answer your question, I would like them to be more effective.
Dr. Ramachandran?
On this particular point, Gulsharan, or
Yes.
beyond?
Yes, on this particular point, I have a question for you as well after this.
In fact, I must at the outset point out that Srimati Nivedita Raju is one of the most outstanding officers I have worked with. And she is an exceptional officer in the sense that to my other colleagues, I'd like to mention, coming from the Audit and Account Service, and since she had the advantage of working on the other side as well, she has a much better appreciation of what needs to be done. And I think, Gulsharan, you rightly focused on that question. And probably that is something which needs to be debated a little bit more. One of the deficiencies, if I may say so, which she has highlighted is reports are taken up after quite some time. Maybe colleagues like Tarunji could look into this aspect. It may not be possible to take up everything, but I think a report has a relevance when it is discussed, when its current relevance is there. And that could make a big difference. And I would only supplement what Nivedita said. During my time, if you recall, Vinod Rai's time, there was a performance audit on the solid waste management. And there were so many revealing factors which had come out in that report, which normally in our normal scheme of things, we don't have access to, or we don't really care for. So these audits serve a purpose. So if we can have an agenda where these performance audits are looked into, they are compiled, they are taken up, and action is initiated on that basis. Now, something like the 74th Constitution Amendment, I'm sure the CAG system must be highlighting what is not happening in almost all the states or most of the states. So there should be a system within government also to take note of this. If 10 state accountant generals have pointed out or highlighted this, what is the gist of that and what we need to do? That has to happen. So it's a question of action following what is highlighted. And I fully agree with her. Earlier, we used to have this impression that CAG just only raises audit objections. But these reports are of so much value. And Gulsharan, I would even suggest for one of your discussions, this could be looked into. How many such reports, what has happened, and is it just, see, we are all good at giving action taken reports. So our effort is always to save our saying that action has been initiated on this, this has been referred to government, this has been done like that. But can we go much beyond that? And that's one aspect which I would want our colleague like Sri Tripathi to take up the role for apex institutions which I have been referred to. If these institutions can take up roles like that, the CAG himself probably may not be able to do, but institutions like this look into this and point out what needs to be done. And when an institution like IIPA or whichever institution it is tells the government that this is the gist of it, this is what needs to be done, the government should be able to take it up immediately and bring about the change. And I suppose at some platform where the members of parliament also look into these things, they would also feel happy that something has been highlighted, something has been looked into, these changes have happened. Can we have a regime change like that? That is what is important. Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, that brings me to another question of accountability, which is what your book, points out at various places. To do with this is my question to Dipali ji, whether it is the banking system or which is what even Dr. Ramachandran talked about, going to LIC branch, Sometimes the system is down, the server is not working, although so much of digitalization has happened in one form or another, it appears to be the callousness of the system and a total lack of sensitivity to provide an immediate solution to a customer who is there in the queue. So Jandan accounts and accessibility, to business correspondence, another subject that we are familiar. So what in your view could be a workable solution in matters like this? And how can accountability get focused at that ground level? Dipaliji.
But I entirely agree with the previous speaker that accountability is going to be the central to governance. The leadership accepts responsibility because they are punished electorally, but accountability is fairly bureaucratic. And CAG and all other institutions of government, they only point out intermittently what is wrong, what is
that
right.
is very correct. But you see,
Can I finish? I will take one sentence.
Yeah, Tripathi, you can finish.
So, secondly, if accountability is only limited to the government and bureaucracy, then couple of things which are being tried now, they need to be highlighted. In our Mission Karmayogi initiative, we are trying to highlight these three aspects: behavioral knowledge, domain knowledge, and the what we call it functional knowledge. All these three, earlier our training was confined to 80% domain, which in any case everybody knows, 10% to functional, which in any case everybody has served for 10 years, so he knows what is functional. But on behavior, it was a wrong word, because how can you teach behavior to a 10-year district magistrate who has already managed a 1 million district? But fact remains that all is not well in so-called 10-year experience. So now we are more emphasizing on behavioral part and soft part of it. And that is the answer for many of the problems. If you have gone to a bank and bank, let's say server is down, if you treat that customer better, the person forget that server is down. But if you treat that person also without any even taking a due care, then he feels that not only system server is down, even you are down. You have no reason to exist there. So attitude towards citizen and accountability towards citizen is going to be the hallmark of next stage of governance, and that is what we teach and we try to imbibe in II. As one more aspect that CAG, that our colleague highlighted, in fact, we evaluate many schemes of the state and central and state government. There we also highlight that why don't you streamline your own rules so that CAG will have no reason to point out the same? Because it is our own rule we have become victim of that. Citizens, they face EODB, EOL, and all those things, which we take a lot of time to sort it out. But in CAG's, all the paras, you will find that you have not implemented your own rule. Achha, who prevents you from changing your rule? None. So we have tried to, I was Secretary RD in Orissa, we faced CAG objection on that your tender process, you have accepted single tender. We changed the rule that if process has been finalized properly, even single tender is good enough. And we used it for settling about more than 10,000 crores of PMGSY work by even with the first bid. And I would like to highlight that we got 1 to 2% less than our estimated cost, because people were sure that this time tender will be accepted. In fact, I'm reminded of Samir's idea that why don't you document PMGSY success? But at that time, I think I failed. But maybe today I got the chance to mention it. So it is we who have prepared the rule. In fact, not understanding anything, we are more ruled by the provision than by the main act and by the main rules. I think who else knows less, much better than Mr. Ramchandran himself. And this is the right occasion for discussing this. Thank you, sir.
Dipaliji.
Could you please repeat your question, Gulsharanji? I missed it out in the connectivity.
So in fact, I was talking about the long queues at the bank branch, which is what, partly been addressed by Mr. Tripathi, or LIC, wherever one goes to for either a banking or an insurance purpose, whether the payment is the system is down, the server is down, and he's made to stand in a queue. And whether it is a Jandan account, in urban areas it's probably different, but server is most likely almost all the time down in the rural areas. But the banking correspondent is another subject that we are familiar with. So in your view, what I was asking is, what could be a workable solution in a situation like this, wherein accountability is focused at the ground level?
Accountability at the ground level is very essential, and there is a lot to be said for digital penetration, because you see now in the urban areas the bank is not a place where you go to. The bank is a service which is delivered to you. You go to an ATM, you immediately get your money. And it is very irritating. Every time they tell you that the server is down. I had the experience yesterday. I said, I have to file my income tax return. Will you please mail me my income tax statement? They said, no, server is down. So for a poor person, server is down is something he doesn't even understand. So for him, a banking correspondent हु इज ए लोकल गाय जो उनकी भाषा में उनसे बात कर सकता है और उनकी समस्याओं का समाधान करने का प्रयास कर सकता है, क्योंकि वही समस्याएं उसके समक्ष भी आती हैं. ये दिस बिकम्स वेरी वेरी क्रिटिकल, because you see, I mean, if you talk down to people or you create on paper systems which work without seeing how they work in practice, you're not getting anywhere. So there the CAG audits and the inspections which the RBI does and the accountability framework is very important. Then the market system also is very merciless. You will not go to a bank where there is a long queue. You see, earlier days there used to be when your father or my father were banking, everybody had one scooter and everybody had one bank where they went. And there was no concept of getting loans or getting any facilities from the bank, but the banker knew you, knew your father, knew everybody. Nowadays, nobody is known. It is an anonymous thing. So if you have to wait in a queue, you will promptly walk across to the new private sector bank, to the new payments bank, which is coming up. And this competition in itself will create better services. But I have great hope in the Jandhan Aadhaar mobile. And even in the Jandhan, you see, we had great problems with the Prevention of Money Laundering Act and the financing of terrorism in the G20, where I was the India representative. Then I argued that because we have ceilings on the amount which can be retained as a deposit and the amount which can be withdrawn, therefore this does not pose a threat, and rather keeping people outside the pale of the banking system, because here you leave an audit footprint with every transaction that you do, and we will come to know which are the questionable transactions. So these are very important, because you have seen, particularly during COVID, that the benefits are actually reaching the people, reaching the women headed households. The women did get their 500 rupees, which were given to them without any intermediary, but a lot of work needs to be done at the grassroots level to ensure. And this is what I say, just you just need to keep drilling down to the last mile, to the last functionary, and to keep in mind the good Mahatma Gandhi's words that think of your action. What difference is it going to make to the poorest of the poor and to his life? And if you use that as a lodestar, you are certain to move from macro policy to the light. So I have great hope in these things, in these initiatives of the government, particularly.
Let me ask Mr. Srinivas, how close are we to have a common man's assessment of governance delivery? And how proactively would you support and propagate the idea of independent city mentors, eminent public persons oversight mechanism that the book proposes, and society wardens, not as another layer, but as a genuine and recognized facilitators?
When I read Dr. Ramchand's book, I found I was quite in sync with several of his thoughts. And particularly on digitization, the rise of the digital institutions is a reality. And it is something that rural societies, as also urban societies, have supported at great length. The rise of digital institutions have brought about a need for a new narrative for the Indian bureaucracy, in that we need to reskill ourselves, we need to undergo process reengineering to simplify citizens' journeys. A portal by itself would not benefit. It requires constant process reengineering, new cadres to be deployed, new skills to be developed. And the quest for Indian bureaucracy's new narrative has also seen a number of civil servants who have gone well beyond the call of duty to provide that kind of institutional leadership and brought in remarkable transformations in several sectors. Today in Bhubaneswar, I've heard the Right to Services Commission of Maharashtra, which actually addressed 10.84 crore service delivery requests in a period of last 5 years. So the rise of digital institutions is something that is a reality, and creating empowered citizens, that remains the challenge where digital inclusiveness has to be a focus, because change has been accepted. How do you create more digitally empowered citizens, more integrated portals which are providing more and more services online? Today, Umang has more than 1150 services online, but there's scope for bringing in some more. The direct benefits transfer portal, BharatNet, has about 314 services online. And so digital inclusiveness is the next challenge, and that has been brought about in Dr. Ramchandran's book when he quotes the Chief Secretary of Meghalaya, who said internet connectivity in Meghalaya remains a challenge. The second aspect of it is how close are we to a governance model that takes us closer to the citizens? The Central Secretariat, as also the state secretariats, are process-driven institutions. In fact, if you read 1953, Paul Humphrey Appleby report on the survey of public administration points out multiple levels of channels of submission. Then when you look at the Second Administrative Reforms Commission of 2005 to 2009, you again find the same reference that the channels of submission should be brought down. And in 2021, when we are looking at the initiative for increasing efficiency in decision making, we again find creating flatter organizations, bringing down the channels of submission, represents a challenge, and it's a complex process of bringing about change. So flatter organizations, digital organizations, transparent organizations, these remain the thrust, and these remain the essential features of administrative reforms. And the bureaucracy's quest for a new narrative is a smaller part of the story of the governance quest for a new narrative. And the governance quest for a new narrative is digital institutions. So the bureaucracy has to adapt and reskill and upskill itself to identify it, to go closer and closer to the citizen. So my own experience has been simplifying a citizen's journey in the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. That there's a reference to it that Dr. Ramchandran saw patients in the waiting for several hours. So we did have a digital AIMS project, which actually simplified the patient's journey in hospitals by creating an online patient registration portal, www.ors.gov.in. And replication of it was quite rapid. We found it more than 598 hospitals adopted it. Today, the digital footprint of the e-hospital project is more than 3 crore Indians have benefited from the initiative, and government has launched a national health mission. So when I look back in July 2015, we actually saw huge crowds and massive challenges in terms of opening up an institution driven by manual processes to digitization. Then I saw the same with the Board of Revenue, and I found it extremely difficult to simplify a litigant's journey in revenue courts. I found it inordinately long, 22 years. In fact, I found a judgment which I had written when I was a subdivisional officer had come to me in appeal when I was chairman Board of Revenue, and it's inordinately long. And how do you simplify a journey? Digitization can bring enormous benefits in terms of simplifying a citizen's journey. And I see in CP grams today, 33 lakh citizens apply on that portal, and grievance redressal can be brought down. The disposal time we find in many cases is quite low. In fact, in the COVID period, it was as low as 3 days. So digitization with mapping of last mile grievance officers, with integration of portals, as also with enhanced monitoring. In fact, as the famous Gorwala report says, what is not inspected is simply not done. That remains true even in modern day governance. Let me conclude by saying that what Dr. Duvar Subbarao told me, I'd asked him, what is the difference between a 21st century civil servant like me and a 20th century civil servant, which he was? He said, Srinivas, there is really no difference between the challenges you're facing and the challenges that I have faced. Commitment to larger public good remains the overarching challenge that both of us have faced and will continue to face in the coming years also.
Well said. So while we are overshooting time, let me request from the panel another 5 minutes. And for 2 minutes each, I will invite Mr. Vijay, followed by Mr. Tripathi. So Mr. Vijay, the book argues and cites instances that people still expect, and what technological facilitation can do for them, and should be fully user-friendly and hassle-free. So what further needs to be done to fully ensure that technology just not delivers, but delivers fully in a hassle-free manner?
I think the use of artificial intelligence is the best thing that Dr. Ramchandran has suggested. AI is a new mantra for the future. If we don't get it, we don't enter the future orbit. China is light years ahead of us. Israel is a best friend, and Israel is the hub at the capital, world capital of AI and cyber security things. These things must begin and must be included at the school level. At the school level, AIC must find a special curriculum. The second thing is the 10 commandments that Dr. Ramchandran has discussed at the end of his book in under chapter towards becoming a global model. I think this is very important because this must become an anthem, kind of a mantra for every bureaucrat to be followed. The final thing is that reducing the gap between the bureaucrat and the politician and the citizen is the main issue. And for that, the digitization of India has become the biggest change post independence. Now, 1 year before, people were not so much sure about Beam or about RuPay, about paying through mobile, Google Pay. Now, it has crossed the level which no country in the world has ever achieved. So I was very interested in what Dr. Mr. Srinivas was saying. I'm in AIMS today because of some injury and speaking from there. I know that my admission, my medicine, and my old UID numbers, I all got in seconds through digitized that way. And the website proved biggest, very big help. So digitization is the key. Unfortunately, it has become the slave of the English language. We think that the English language alone can deliver. No, sir. You cross daily 18 kilometers, 20 kilometers. There is no English. People try to use technology in their own language. So this technology must deliver to people who know Tamil, Telugu, Bangla, Malayalam, and Hindi. They should not become uh, hooked to English language. That is one thing. And in education system and even among bureaucracy, the local language must prevail. That is my view. uh, our government has done a lot in digitization, and this has become the global success story. Whether it's Ujjwala, whether it's Ayushman Bharat medicines, with the Jan Aushadhi Kendra, Amrit Aushadhi Kendra, and other revolutionary movements and steps taken in the area of medicine and research. The COVID vaccine to the crores of people is not a mean achievement. This could happen because we use the digital channel. So digitization, use of AI, and sensitizing the bureaucrat and neta together, there should be a compulsory interactions between the politician and the bureaucrats at the state, district, and central level. Thank you.
Thank you. So Tripathi this brings me to you with the last question, although there could be something uh, uh, could could be for the larger discussion, and we would love to take this further, but in the interest of time, a very pointed question to you: that book also talks about corruption as an issue, and in your view, what could be a few, one, two, or three key steps that can be taken to minimize or to check or to arrest the influence of corruption in common man's dealing with the government? Cite one example, recent one: a heist of 70 lakhs at somebody's place. Police swung into action, and instead of catching the culprit, arrested the person's son in whose room the safe was, which got burgled.
Like there is, to put it lightly, people say that corruption kuch le de ke hi jaye. That may be the lighter way of saying it, but the real way of saying it that digitalization is the option. Before us, we have seen it. I can give you one example. Opening account in a bank. Dipali ji will join with me because RBI versus SBI, you see this gap also need to be bridged, because when the tire touches ground, you realize the value of the road. Opening an account used to be a humongous task. Today, you take an Aadhaar, go to a bank, you get an account. 430 million accounts have been opened by the same branches. No new branch has come up. 3 billion transactions are happening on GST every month. No new office has been created. We transacted more money through mobile banking than through ATM cash withdrawal only in previous year. These are huge changes, huge challenges, which are happening without anybody watching. And that is what is true about corruption also. If we reduce the interference of the government, go into DBT, go into technology-led, or as Tarun sir was saying, AI and ML, they can answer many of the queries. But one thing I would certainly say that I'm not, against the rise of artificial intelligence, but I'm certainly worried about decline of real intelligence among the bureaucrats who are dealing with the public at the last mile. And last mile is our most difficult mile, because at policy level, planning commission, Niti Ayog, Secretary to Government of India, Secretary at state level, even at collector level, so doesn't pinch the way it pinches at video level, Tahsildar level, RI level, and Thana level. So all these things need to be digitized, and digital is the only solution for a billion plus country. I'm not saying the only means, there may be better solution. I think Mr. Ramchandra's new book will throw those light. But to me, as of now, it looks that digital is the way, and maybe the only way. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you so much. Dr. Ramachandran, would you like to say a few words as the discussion comes to a close based on the reflections which have been given by different panelists?
Yeah, I don't know whether I should prolong this further, but for me personally, this has been a very, very enlightening discussion. I think the contributions made have been of great value. That shows that there is a way forward. That's how I still remain an optimist, and there is still a way forward. But that way forward has to be meaningful for, again, the ordinary person. I agree with all the transformations which are taking place. But as also mentioned, the server is not working at a particular point in time. That's one. We assume that digital will solve all our problems, but I'm not very sure whether it is happening. Of course, I'm not criticizing. I'm in awe of the changes which have come about. Tripathi is absolutely right. I myself have become a convert. Earlier, I used to go to the bank, use the checkbook and things like that. Now I have gone beyond that. But and Tarunji says local language. That's also equally important. But I'm still wondering, someone in some far off village or in some corner of a city, will she be able to access this in such a swift manner as some of us do? And will it provide a solution to them? So that is what we need to look into. It's good thing we have started it, but how to operationalize it and make it meaningful? Would some new middlemen come in the process? I do not know how to operate the mobile or the laptop or iPad or whatever it is, so I need help. Language is a problem, and repeatedly I keep trying, it keeps saying, go to this, go to that, upload this, download this, and things like that. What is the solution to that? I think that is what is going to be critical. I agree in banks also there have been changes. But banks, I have specifically again mentioned an example. There is a machine which is supposed to update your passbook. But quite often there are good number of branches, I don't know what is the percentage, the machine will not be working at a particular point in time. So again, you have to have that human face, human interface to get it done. Like if it is at the branch, if it's the ATM, there will be a small display saying that this is not working. So if there is something which needs to be done at that particular point in time, what do I do? So it has to reach those levels whereby it becomes meaningful. And I think it is possible. The capacity we have, the technological excellence we have, the the inclination we have, with all that, it is possible. It's a question of how to make that happen. There are some solutions suggested here. Tarun, you repeatedly mentioned about the politician, the civil service sitting together and working it out, and probably the camps and all those things which happen are supposed to help this process. Nivedita, on the other hand, mentioned about what the CAG tries to help and point out. So there are various elements which have come out today, which, if put together, I think my book would probably, tomorrow's book, I don't know when that tomorrow comes, would be how governments and people have been brought closer. Would there still be a gap or not? Or 90% of the matters, it is done, maybe 10% there is an issue. This has happened in the case of passports. You remember passports used to be a big issue, but now many of us or most of us can get passports in an easy process. I still haven't studied and understood why, how a class 5 person or so, if he or she needs a passport, how that works. I still have a feeling there will be someone to help that person. And what that someone does, that is the question. So can we get rid of that someone in between? And can I do things myself? It's another matter if I seek somebody's help, like we all do. I keep taking the help of my daughters who are tech savvy in some of these matters. Sometimes the connectivity doesn't work, that's what we do. That we do. But other than that, if you have to pay for a service, if you have to bribe somebody, if you have to find some money for getting things done, the classic example of registration, Mr. Srinivas referred to the Rajasthan example. I think there are some states where registration and mutation have been linked. But one of the fundamental points I raised is, I don't know how many registration offices some of us would have visited. I've seen registration offices where people just crowd outside. I mean, it is like, you fend for yourself. When your turn comes, you can come in and get things done. And at that time, if the person at the counter says that X is not there, Y is not there, then one always thinks that it would have been better to go through a broker. So we have to get over all this and have a, when I say transparency, this is all what transparency is. Any person, especially the underprivileged person as far as technology services are concerned, how can he or she succeed in getting what he or she wants, which is what the government wants? I mean, we have seen generation changes. Srinivas referred to my batchmate Duguri Subbarao. During my time when I used to go to villages, I used to feel very agitated when somebody's old age pension form is not facilitated. Today, probably that is not the scene. Today, almost all of them who are entitled succeed in getting an old age pension. But then the next stage is there enough budgetary provision that they continuously get monthly payments? Again, I may be slightly outdated, but these are all the facts on the ground which need to be addressed, which may not really get listed in such detail. But as rightly mentioned, it is for people, functionaries at that level and the supervisory level. There was a reference. I have referred in my earlier book about the UP system where inspections take place. The very purpose of inspections by senior people, including board members, is to find out what is the lacuna in the system and to bring about corrections changes. But that was a certain way of doing things. Today, with the help of technology, much more can be done. So I'm grateful to for you to hosting this discussion. It has been of great value. For all my friends and colleagues who found time to participate in this discussion. And probably this discussion will facilitate some more action at some end. With that great hope, I leave it at this and thank everyone. Back to you, Bhushan.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really interesting, Dr. Ramachandran. In fact, you have very succinctly, I say once again, brought out the need for a demand side governance. There are 3 or 4 takeaways, which is what are extremely important. There is need to identify issues of the common man. That means to say that the delivery of the policies and the services have to be attuned to the needs of, and it's actually happened to a great extent, and technology is a big enabler there. The point also brought about by the book is that eminent public persons are to be assimilated into the governance process. Civil society actually plays a very, very important role, so that cannot be dismissed any longer. We need to improve the ease of common man's interaction with the government index. How to do that? There are mechanisms which are already there, already been pointed out by our esteemed panelists there. So there is a learning in addition to what the book proposes to do, and to enlarge the role of the Department of Administrative Reforms. There is no denying the fact. This very important role for the national institutions like Indian Institute of Public Administration in the area, so that the reorientation of the thinking, the reorientation of with the new government schemes, mid service or the later period is extremely important. And being at the place where Mr. S.N. Tripathi is sitting today, this is something which no one can agree more than this, that the role played by such institutions are extremely critical. And the best part that I found about the book is that it's just about 126 pages. And that means that these are actually the reflections that have been put together over 38 years long service that Dr. Ramachandran has had, and 10 years of being outside it, which was something pointed out in the beginning itself. Otherwise, this book would have been more than 300 pages. So on this positive note, I thank ladies and gentlemen, all of you once again for joining us on this discussion, making it lively, throwing up even more ideas for Dr. Ramachandran's next book. And thanks once again, and I wish everyone a good night.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. In fact, Gursaran ji, एक मैं चीज कहना चाह रहा था.
जी जी बताइए.
I think we can still repeat because in any case now informed. It is saying ना कि समंदर उल्टा सीधा बोलता है. समंदर उल्टा सीधा बोलता है, सलीके से तो प्यासा बोलता है. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm leaving, sir. Thank you, sir.
Good night.
Thank you, sir, very much.
Bye-bye.